So I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And this is our second in a series of events we're holding to encourage member engagement with presidential candidates. So I want to thank you all for being here. We've been working to deliver our Unions for All message to all of the candidates, and thankfully Marianne is a long and strong advocate of working people and for unions. We really appreciate your tweeting a statement in support of our recent win at Rockingham County Nursing Home.
Congratulations.
And I thought before I turned it over to you for a few brief remarks, we could just go around the table and introduce ourselves and where we work or retired from.
Thank you.
John, you want to?
I work for the Department of Health and Human Services, Child Support Services. My name is John Hand, and I'm the chair of the Political Education Committee, too.
Very important. Very important.
I am a Chapter 1 member of retirees. I used to work in DHHS in the Medicaid Disability Determination Unit. I am also a writer to the local newspaper from the middle of the state, and I advocate for many groups, open-minded. I used to be a firefighter EMT for over 35 years, and that's pretty much it.
Are you busier now than ever?
Huh?
Are you busier now than ever?
It seems that way.
That's what people tell me.
Yeah, just so many times, so.
My name is John. I'm from Chapter 37, which is New Hampshire Employment Security, the unemployment office. I work and live on the seacoast. I just found out that you're going to be on the seacoast on Sunday. Oh, God, I drove an hour to get here.
Oh.
But anyway,
Well, thank you.
I'm a certifying officer, and I make determination of unemployment compensation is an eligibility program, and I make determinations of eligibility for claimants. I talk to claimants and I talk to employers. It's all I do all day. In fact, I did a couple hours before coming here, and I know what the economy is really like because I also do a labor market. So, and I've been with Employment Security since '92.
Do things seem worse now?
We're seeing trends. I've been seeing, well, I don't want to hog everybody's time. But yeah, I'm seeing trends for the last year and a half that are disturbing. Regardless of what the media says, what the economy is, what everybody says.
It must be very painful for you, though, because you have to give bad news to
I
some...
can see some trends that I can talk to you later about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you are on it.
Thank you.
On it.
Thank you.
I've seen you on C-SPAN, the Amon Port interview, the Steve Scully interview on C-SPAN, the National Press Club. You are on it, and that's why
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jess Wheeler-Russell, and I am a DOIT employee. I am a software developer who is embedded in corrections, and I build application software for the corrections department.
Peggy Rossi, I'm from Concord. I'm an attorney with the Child Support Division, and I think the thing that's had the biggest impact on our workload lately is grandparents and sisters and aunts and uncles taking care of kids because of the opioid crisis. That's just such an increasing part of our caseload these days.
And that must be part of what you do with the...
I cope with a lot of the policy stuff. I'm a policy writer.
Garrett Grafton. I'm a geologist for the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department, and I'm in charge of building boat ramps and maintaining them across the state. And then,
Do you say boat ramps?
Boat ramps.
Uh-huh.
So recreation in the state, tourist industry and so forth. For us. I'm with, I guess it's Chapter 47 is Fish and Game.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Healy. I live in Antrim, New Hampshire, and I am an employee of the Department of Health and Human Services, the Child Protection Services, and I manage the state foster care program.
Is that something that you would say is getting worse rather than better?
In what respect?
Infiltration of the foster care system by forces that shouldn't have their fingerprints on it, the kind of despair that was talked about, even something like what this woman is talking about.
Well, we are, as all states across the country, in need of quality foster care family as a temporary situation for children while their situation is remediated with their biological families. So, but that is not unique to New Hampshire. That is
No, I didn't mean compared to other states at all. I just meant compared to 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, the trends are up and down.
Yeah.
So I can't say that it is
Yeah, okay.
solely due to one factor in the state. It's just a society trend.
Good afternoon. My name is Dennis Etchels. I work for the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department Law Enforcement Division. I oversee the state snowmobile and ATV recreation program. And I'm also the chairman of the conservative committee that the SEA has formed here in New Hampshire.
Hi, my name is Marie Morgan. I'm a retiree from the New Hampshire Department of Education, and I live in Goffstown.
Hi, I'm Don Daly. I'm with Administrative Services and Procurement and Support Services, and I live in Concord.
I'm Ed Hinkus, retired. Put the past behind me, and I'm at peace.
What, I'm sorry, what did you do?
I'm retired, and I put the past behind.
Yeah.
And I'm at peace.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll see.
But you're here, so you still care.
That's right.
I'm Victor Demorado. I've worked for the state of New Hampshire for 19 years. Currently, I work for Department of Corrections. I collect restitution for victims of crime, mostly Hillsborough County and Cheshire County. It's an honor to be here with you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm German Martins. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm a state worker. I worked for the state of New Hampshire 31 years at the Department of Health and Human Service, the last 10 years at the Office of Health Equity. I really enjoyed your message at the convention. I
Thank
thought it
you.
was very good to hear
Thank you.
universal health care and 15 minimum wage, state-sponsored tuition. Those are all things I believe. So thanks for running.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Richard Gulla. I work for the Liquor Commission, 21 years of state service, and I want to thank you for being here with our members today and for running.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm Robert Gillespie. Thank you for being here. I'm just a supporter of the union and retired.
I'm Deborah Wheeler. I worked for, or have, 52 years of service with the union. That's both active and retired. I retired from the Department of Revenue after 22 years. Before that, it was agriculture, and before that, it was the Adjutant General.
Okay.
So I covered a lot of areas. I've also been a state rep for 3 terms. And
Wow.
I'm very involved in my union. I want to see everything. No one believes that if we could be allowed to strike, we would shut the state down as state employees.
That would be great.
Nobody would be able to do anything. And we did it once, a long time ago.
When?
I'm thinking about in the 80s, but it could have been the beginning of the 70s. I'm trying to think where I was working at the time.
Well, how were you able to do it?
It was a sick-out. And then we heard from the National Guard, and we heard from the correction officers, the people who had to fill in at the state hospital because the employees didn't show up, that they would never do it again because they didn't realize how hard a state worker does work. And because of that, I'm an advocate for the wages being increased, the minimum, if you can, so somebody can actually get off of a welfare if they're on it. It's just that your state employees, a lot of times, are not treated as human beings. We're just there. And for being that, I'm trying to see, I wrote something down here. No, that's all right, I've covered it. But I've seen a lot in my 52 years.
Would you say things are getting worse rather than better?
Yes.
I think so too.
It's in shades.
Pardon?
It's in shades of how it's
Yeah.
breaking down.
Well, you have too many young people who don't even remember when it was different.
Correct.
That's the worst part of it.
That's what we were discussing before.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your allowing me to be here and to hear your stories and to have a deeper sense of what's going on here with your union, which is what I sense going on all over the country in all different kinds of unions. On the level of policy changes, obviously I'm a left-wing Democrat. We're talking about living wage, we're talking about $15 an hour minimum wage, we're talking about health care, et cetera. But I believe that in order for genuine change and transformation to happen, we have to sit back and have a bigger conversation about what's happened. Many of us are old enough to know the larger historical narrative. This started 40 years ago, and it is nothing less than a war on unions. It is nothing less than a war on unions. And it's important for us to, all Americans, and to be the keeper of the story. I think for those of us who are old enough also to remember that our relationship to younger people, I say to younger people all the time, it wasn't always like this. I'm not whitewashing or romanticizing American capitalism before then, but I tell the youngins there was actually a time in my lifetime where the social agreement was such that if somebody had worked for a company, for a corporation, for decades, they were expected to care. They were actually expected to care. Common sense said they should care what happened if they had a dignified retirement. This, as soon as this corporatist agenda, and we want to make sure that we're clear, corporatist and conservative are not the same word. You know, high-minded conservatives, high-minded liberals both care about people. They have different ideas about what that should do. But this is corporatism. It is soulless. It justifies short-term profits for the stockholder at the expense of the worker, at the expense of the environment, at the expense of the community. It is not immoral, but it is amoral. Just that it doesn't feel, it's not that it wakes up, that those forces wake up in the morning and wish any of you harm. They just wake up in the morning and they just think how you're doing, how your kids are doing isn't something they're supposed to have to think about. And that has brought us to where we are. It is more than just policy change. We really need to wake up. This is what Franklin Roosevelt called the economic royalists. It's really aristocracy versus democracy that we're talking about here. I hear all of you talk, you know, and what I was thinking of when you were talking was like in a room, okay? We don't see what's really going on with all the wiring, that the lights are turning on. We don't necessarily see all the drywall, who put in the windows, who put in the roof, who put in those blinds. But without the people who put in those blinds and did those lights and made sure that the fire alarm was working, this whole thing wouldn't be happening. That's who you are. That's who you are of the state of New Hampshire. And the way this country was set up and the way it should be, the country belongs to you. You put up those things and then the country belongs to you. So you have one major political party that kind of doesn't agree with that anymore. And you have another major political party that wants to make your life better, but isn't willing to challenge the underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable because they're taking money too. Because it's all the corporate donations, it's all the money that floods into that system, and this is not going to change until and unless we step in. Because what you're experiencing in your union, multiply it by, not just by unions all over the country. It's not just a war against unions. It's a war against the poor. It's a war, in a certain way, it's a war against democracy. Now, I'm not saying that it's a bunch of mean people who are sitting there somewhere wishing anyone harm. It's not like that. It's a system, and like I said, it's just people who feel that it's not their job to have to advocate for you. And then because of their money on the government, so that the government's advocating for them, who's supposed to advocate for you? But when I say you, I don't just mean you, I mean 90% of the country. And this is where we are, and I don't think it serves us to speak it any less honestly than that. This is not going to change because of incremental change. This is not going to change just because we get that $15 an hour minimum wage. It's not going to change just because we get that health care. It's always like Sisyphus with the rock. We got to stand back and go, what has happened in this country? And that's why I'm running for president, because we have to have a bigger story. And what you and I were just talking about is true. You've got young people that were born in the 70s, that were born in the 80s, that were born in the 90s. They don't know. This is aberrant. What's happening now is an aberration. You know, the history of unions, it is the tradition, it is a patriotic tradition of America to push back against overreach by capitalism. That's why unions exist. That's why child labor laws exist. That's why anti-monopoly exhaust exists. Now, I'm not an anti-capitalist at all, but it's a virulent strain of capitalism where market forces are considered the justified organizing principle. And that is as true whether you're state union or any other. It's a pillar of the corporatist mentality is to fight unions. That's a pillar. That's a pillar of it. But it's not going to get better if all we are is, we've all been trained into a pretty please. And I heard you say you're conservative, so this is not conservative that I'm talking about. This is corporatist. And the suffering I heard, and then I'll be quiet and just take it from your questions, etc. I was in one of my most impactful moments on this campaign was being up in northern New Hampshire, where I was told by business and political leaders there that 25% of the children in northern New Hampshire go to sleep hungry at night.
That's probably true.
That's true.
Oh, you think just more food pantries are going to change that? This is right. You know, you were talking about the geological. All of you here mentioned jobs you have where you see what's happening on the inner workings. That's where the cancer is. That's where some of this rot is. And so you need more, I believe, we need more than a president who says, I'll try to get you what you need without being willing to really articulate the level of problem that is causing all this, because that president, however well-intentioned, is part of the system. It's not about bad people. Not every rich person's a greedy bastard. Not every, this is not about individuals, but it is about a system where the government has become so corrupted that in ways both large and small, both covert and overt, they're not advocating for you. They're not advocating for you. Even when they advocate for you on a peripheral level, oh, we want that $15 an hour minimum wage, or we want that, the health care. It's got to be deeper. It's got to be that the government takes a stand for you and knows that the government is supposed to belong to you. All public policy should be that which helps people thrive. That's why you should have universal health care. None of you guys, with everything that you described to me, that everybody at this table described to me you do all day, you should be able to go home. The last thing you work hard already. You work hard already. You shouldn't even have to worry about how am I going to send my kids to college? How am I going to pay off a college loan? What'll happen if I get sick? What'll happen if one of my kids gets sick? The government should work so that you don't even have to think about it. So you don't have to think about it. You don't have to think about it. No, you shouldn't even have to think about it. The government's job is making so you don't have to think about it, so that you can do all the things you already described you did, not only well, but happily. And so that then when you go home at night, you have time to talk to your wife, to your husband, to your lover, to your friends, to read a story to your kids, to your grandkids. That's what government should be for. Government should not be in any way, shape, or form working to undermine your ability to do that. And if you make me president, you'll have a president who's not only clear about that, but publicly says so.
Awesome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have a lot of history with union. My father was born in Pembroke in 1995. My grandparents worked in the mills. And my grandfather called a strike, and he was blacklisted. So then they moved up to a farm in Vermont, actually Northfield, Vermont, and I'm now living in Northfield, New Hampshire. Then my father also believed in the rights of people to have good wages, at least to be able to have a little bit to do stuff with your family. He worked for the stone sheds. He was a master polisher. And he called a strike. It's in our family. And he was blacklisted for 10 years from the stone sheds because he called a strike because people were going down in the quarries. And it would be in the winter. They didn't always close them. And the ice would be on the cables, and 5 men dropped to the bottom. They were his fishing buddies because we all ice fish. So I've seen it through the time how people have to work to make people hear what they as an individual need to live. And then to have the geeks and goons come after them because they are doing the right thing.
It used to be that the big robber barons would actually take police out. They would hire policemen, their own private, to shoot those people. Today, I can't even believe we're even having a conversation in 2019 about whether or not collective bargaining should exist. When I was a child, and my grandfather worked on the Rock Island Railroad, in the same type of situation. He took my father to, when he was a little boy, to see Eugene V. Debs, etc. Yeah. When I was a child, to cross a picket line, the word was scab.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
If you cross a picket line, don't bother to come home.
Right.
We have young people today who don't even get that it's a big deal. That has been the biggest success of the anti-union forces, is that they have infiltrated the imagination of the American mind. When we were growing up, it was understood. It was understood. And today, even in the Democratic Party, instead of really honoring and exalting, it's more we need unions to get elected, as opposed to we need to build up again the realization that's what a political party should be, is the voice of why unions matter. And that's what concerns me. I remember I went up to an airport once, and I was with a girlfriend, and I said, well, we can't do that, you know, they're on strike. And she looked at me like she honestly didn't understand why I was, said, oh, you can just walk through. I said, no, actually you can't. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Questions? We have some questions.
Yes, sir.
Start over
Yes,
here, we'll work away over here.
She mentioned the paper mills, which were a big thing, you know, in New Hampshire, and they were actually closed down because of the EPA and the environmental issues. Did the paper mills go away? No, they went to China.
That's right.
Okay, so we can, with the Green Deal and with all the environmental stuff, we can control the U.S., but we're maybe 25% of the problem. When we had the China Olympics, they hardly could run the marathon because of the air pollution.
Right.
When they had the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro,
Right.
there was problems with feces and stuff in the water,
Right.
where they couldn't do the water sports,
Right.
and things like that. In the U.S., when I dealt with businesses that, like a Home Depot or things like that, they forced us to change and have our manufacturing done in China.
Well, who forced you? What do you mean?
Home Depot, they would require you to have so much percent of your product made in China because they knew it would be cheaper, so they could sell it cheaper. Okay, now you only have 2 players, Lowe's and Home Depot, so you're forced to play by their rules. Okay?
That's really disgusting.
So they can manipulate things. You know, and the other problem we have is we're no longer just a U.S. economy. When we had like the Robinson-Patman Act, we could control monopolies and stuff.
Okay.
With the global economy, if we don't do it, another country can win a global business, you know, because we can't prevent them from coming in. But my question really comes back to the environment, because it is important. And the whole platform of the Democratic Party is really solid on worrying about the environment. But if we only can control 25%, how are we really going to get the rest of the world lined up? We've tried regime changes. We know we think we can control the powers to be. But realistically, I mean, it's kind of like we don't talk about how are we going to get China in line? How are we going to get these other countries?
Well, the truth of the matter is China has a more long-term vision of environmental issues than we do. China is already making, they have some 25-year plans that we don't. So I don't think, I mean, when you look at what the reality is there now, you're correct. But if you think in terms of the long-term plans that they have, I'm not so sure. The United States, you're right, we can't control everyone else. But then on the other hand, we shouldn't be even thinking about trying to control anybody else. We have lost and sacrificed our moral leadership. That is the most important thing the United States can have. The most important power the United States has to influence the world is to demonstrate that which is correct. And the more we demonstrate that which is correct, the more beneficent influence, powerful, positive influence we have in other countries to follow that lead. So when we do the wrong thing, as we see so much with this current administration, he's giving wink, wink to other countries to do that. Now, it is connected. When you talked about what I really want to talk to you about is environmental issues, not these other trade issues, but they are connected. They're very connected. And part of the problem is that Home Depot even is allowed to do that. I have a little bit of a protectionist streak in me. So when we talk about global trade, we talk about, oh, we need to do it. Of course we need to do global trade, but it should not be at the expense of the American worker. It should not be at the expense of the American worker. Right now, China doesn't have to send soldiers over. All they have to do is send over smart trade negotiators, because they know that our trade negotiators are such whores for corporate profits that they're going to sell out the American workers so Home Depot can make more money. That's where the problem lies, where the rot lies. So you have congressional committees that are allowing American corporations to go over there and share, right? Because China says, you have to give us your technology, you'll have access to our markets, but you have to share with us your technology. Now, a few years ago, we would say, well, it's okay because they can't share military technology. But today, there's a fine line. What's our security? Something doesn't have to be specifically about an airplane to be part of our security. So that's why I believe, and why for my campaign so much is about let's getting back to doing the right thing by people. We have to turn a big ship around. And so as we demonstrate right now, let's not even worry about what's going to happen in China. Let's talk about whether or not we're going to be losing the coast of the East Coast, whether we're going to be losing Charleston. Right now, let's think about whether or not we're going to be losing Seattle. Do you know what I'm saying? Right now, but if we start doing the right thing, and we start doing more the right thing internationally, and we start doing the right thing by the American worker, that has always been America's power, is we try our best to have public policy based on doing the right thing by people and by planet. That has always been our strength and our power. That's what we have to get back to. And it's kind of like boosting your immune system. It's not going to be an immediate, but the ship is going to start turning around. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And we need a World War II level mass mobilization in order to deal with that.
Okay, I have a lot of questions, but one request I do have of you before you leave, make remarks that you made at the National Press Club 2 weeks ago. Very rarely do I, in my apartment, because I'm a renter, because I don't get paid enough to own, live on the seacoast, you'll find out why. Very rarely, unless Brady is throwing a touchdown, will I get up and scream at the TV set over something positive. You said something that said, boy, she's got it. And that's about property taxes. Wow. But the question I have that's going to affect us, as President of the United States, you're going to have to hire judges. Liberals and Democrats don't think about judges and courts. We should, because it's judges, not necessarily the Supreme Court, but the lower courts. Our circuit court, I think, is in Boston. They make rules. They make judgments that affect us, working people. So what I want to know is, do you have an organization not the Federal Society, obviously, but someone on your end, on our end, or advisors that will give you a list of judges, and what kind of judges are you going to, do you have an idea, or do you have of judges that you will appoint to the circuit courts in the Supreme Court, because their decisions affect our lives? A lot of this union stuff, geez, it happened in the Supreme Court.
Well, we have obviously, we have a 5-4 corporatist court right now. And what you're saying is very true. One of the most unfortunate things about the Trump presidency is what he's been able to do, not just on the level of the Supreme Court, but on the level of lower courts. And also, we should all be aware, as I'm sure most of us are, that there were many appointees by President Obama that were held up, that were successfully held up by Mitch McConnell and others. This is one of the issue of the judiciary is one of the ways in which we've got a 20-year process in front of us to try to really end one aberrational chapter and begin a new one. It's not that difficult to find progressive judges. The issue will not be finding progressive judges. That's not the problem. The problem will be, if there is a problem, hopefully there will be enough people serving in Congress and serving in Senate who will not work simply to obstruct the appointment of progressive judges, because what you're pointing out is very serious indeed. In terms of what he talked about property taxes, I said that it's immoral and really immoral that we base our educational funding primarily on property taxes, which means that if a child is in an advantaged neighborhood, the chances of a very high quality public school education is almost guaranteed. But if a child is in a less advantaged neighborhood, then that is not the case. And we have children all over America who go to classrooms where little kids the teacher doesn't even have the circumstances to enable them to teach that child to read. And if a child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. This is why I say, whether you're talking about the opioid crisis or mental health or any of these other issues, we can't just treat them on the level of symptom. We have to treat them on these deep levels of cause, the deeper layers and levels where the injustice originates.
Thank you.
Bob?
Grateful to see you come here and
Thank
hear
you.
it all. I have multiple myeloma, but don't panic. I'm okay right now. I had a stem cell transplant over 3 years ago. It's stable with the use of low-dose oral chemotherapy for as long as I live or until relapse, and then we go from there. The problem I'm having is it's expensive. It's $900 some a month for 21 pills.
How much?
$900+ a month for 21 pills. Fortunately, because I only have Social Security for income, it is covered by a grant at this time. My question to you in this end, and I have a second one which is related, is we need to develop a medical program, hopefully a Medicare for all, only in that we've got to eliminate people who profit on human health care and life. I have a great animosity for the CEOs that make millions and millions of dollars at the expense of the premium holders. The second part of that is I firmly feel it was caused by Roundup, which is made by the manufacturer Monsanto, who also made the glyphosate in Agent Orange in Vietnam. They need to be held accountable, for one, because it profoundly affects all of the workers who use it. I go to a McDonald's and the guy's using this Roundup to clean up the stuff. I said, this is a union matter. They've got to eliminate it. We need to have legislation to ban all products that contain glyphosate so people like me can live a normal life, or anybody who has a lymphoma, a normal life. And how do you propose to do that?
I have really bad news for you.
Huh?
We don't not just not have legislation to ban it, we have legislation to protect Monsanto.
Courts.
But how do we get
That's how
rid of
bad it is.
How do we get rid of it?
That's how bad it is. First of all, it has to be an awakening on the part of the American people. We have to stop electing people who are more interested than in protecting Monsanto because of their corporate profits than in protecting you. Every scientist for the Obama administration had voted to permanently ban the pesticide, glyphosate, I think it's called, that we know does permanent harm to a child's brain. Shortly after this current administration took office, the then head of the EPA, Scott Pruitt, who was an ex-oil company lobbyist. This guy is the new one. The current one is ex-chemical company. They had a secret meeting at a hotel room in Houston with Dow Chemical Company, and they overturned that ban. We're killing ourselves for the sake of corporate profits. It's so immoral. It is so wrong. And yet, it's the people who are going to have to step in now. It's the people who are going to have to step in now. Because not only is there you, but I think we have to hear stories like this and realize there are a million stories like that. And it's not going to get better until there is a real interruption. And there are people who, with the best of the knowledge that they have, continue to vote for people who are voting to protect Monsanto. Because that's what corporatism is. It's a protection of corporate profits, rather than realizing the government should be advocating for you. So it goes to be, and this is really interesting what's in this story, because this is, as I say all the time, we have to do more than just talk about who or how we're going to provide health care. We have to talk about all the things we're doing that are making people sick. I talked about that in the first debate. This is one of the reasons the DNC wanted me off the debate stage.
No kidding.
No, I mean, come on, Americans, we need to wake up here. I don't want to just be a president who helps you get universal health care. I mean, it shouldn't even be a question, but it shouldn't, it's so obscene that we're even talking about whether or not you would have to pay that $900. But it's worse than that. It has to do with the other things you said. Why was that legal? Because Monsanto can pay hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate donations and lobbying. This is how deep the corruption goes now. This is how deep the corruption goes now. And that's why we have to stand up to this, not just as union members. We have to stand up to this as Americans.
I'm doing that now. I've taken them to court.
Good for you.
I'm going
And
to
it
fight
takes that.
until I can keep on doing it, because we got to stop putting profits ahead of people's health.
And that's why they call it the Monsanto Protection Act. So it's the same thing with the GMOs, and it's the same thing with so much.
You've talked about the court, and you've talked about how property taxes inordinately affect working people. So much talk of these days is about voter fraud.
Yes.
And people don't know whether they can vote or not. What are you going to do to bring clarity to voters and talk about, working against voter apathy, getting more people to vote, getting more people involved?
Well, you're really talking about the belly of the beast there. So this is, first of all, the difference between voter fraud and voter suppression. Voter fraud, we have very, 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 very little, like something 0.00001% evidence that there was voter fraud in this country. What there is voter suppression in this country. So let's talk about our history. I think too many Americans haven't visited our history enough. So in 1965, after the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964 to dismantle segregation, in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act was to ensure equal access to the polls for everybody. Okay. In 2013, the John Roberts-led Supreme Court started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act. And this is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said in her dissent. She said, wait a minute. It was raining. We built an umbrella. The umbrella was such a good umbrella, we haven't been getting wet ever since 1965, meaning everybody's had access to the polls. She said, so you're saying now that because nobody's getting wet, we can bring down the umbrella. She said, you're going to take down the umbrella and we're going to get wet again. And this is exactly what happened. So as soon as they started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, it was a spate of voter suppression efforts throughout the country. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, it's like I said, this is a contest at the deepest level between aristocracy and democracy. What is the reason? So the riffraff don't vote. This is why Franklin Roosevelt called it the economic royalists. They see anybody that's not of their corporate aristocratic class as riffraff, which is undemocratic. By the way, many of the people that we're talking about are really nice people and would agree with everything we're saying here. Not every rich person in America is a greedy bastard. This is not about individuals. It's about the way the system now works. And I think that's really important. This is not about bad people. This is about how corrupt the system has become. And I think we need to remember that. Not every rich person is uncaring and not every poor person is pure and noble. So I think that's really important since the conversation is so intense, we have to remember this is not bad people versus good people. So what are we going to do? Well, and you brought up all the different elements. On the external level, we have to now. The Democrats did pass in the House of Representatives H.R. 1, which does a lot to protect voting rights. It would make voter registration automatic on our birthday. I personally believe we should lower the voting age to 17. I mean, these kids at school, they should have a say in what's happening with our gun laws, don't you think? And also, they're going to be here 30, 40 years. We might not. So, I think more powers should be given to them. Part of that bill was to establish voting day as a Saturday or a holiday, et cetera. But, of course, even though it passed in the House, it was, the Senate, the Republican Senate didn't want it. The next thing, so a bill like that, and that was against gerrymandering, but then the Supreme Court just did a very devastating decision around gerrymandering, and gerrymandering is one of the ways that is very undemocratic. Now, the last thing you mentioned was apathy. This is a big deal. You have many people in this country who believe, and unfortunately, they have a case. Voting's not going to help anyway. Nothing's going to change for them. And even though you and I would say it's a dysfunctional form of resistance, psychologically you can see it's a passive resistance. A feeling almost like for me to vote is to play your game, and I won't play your game. And then you have people who are entitled and privileged with this pseudo-intellectual perspective saying it doesn't matter, but really that's just an excuse for not helping. So there are two kinds of cynicism. There's cynicism that's an excuse for not helping, and there's cynicism based on the belief that nothing matters anyway. This is why I'm running for president. Somebody has to just say it like it really is.
Why haven't they made the voting day
a
national holiday? I mean, it's a bitch to vote.
That's exactly. Well, let's talk about this. The founders originally made it a Tuesday, and in those days, that was when the farmers came into town. So when the Constitution was written, Tuesday was the best day to make it easier for people. Today, it absolutely should be a holiday. I'm a fairly smart person, and every year I'm saying, where do I go? Do you know where to go? I can't figure out where to go. Do you know where to go? So if I figure if I'm going through that, I can imagine what somebody who has a much harder time than I do, keeping it all together. So this is purposeful. That's what we have to understand. You don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to recognize this is a deep down conspiracy. And so the cynicism, and one of the reasons I'm running is because when you look at what elected Trump, it wasn't just that some people love Trump. The people who just love Trump did not elect him then and would not be enough to re-elect him. He got a lot of people who I believe are really good people who voted for him, but are at least disturbed. And I think if we just go on and on about how bad he is, that's scolding them, making them wrong. That's not going to make them want to vote for us. But even more than that, Trump won because of the millions of people who didn't vote. Yeah. And among the millions of people who didn't vote are a lot of people that have been exhausted by how hard it is, by the feeling that it doesn't matter anyway, and that nobody's really telling the truth. Now, I'm a Democrat, and I've lived long enough that when people say, they're all the same, I say, based on my life, well, not really. One's a lot worse than the other. But there are enough people who don't really remember a time when that was that obvious. And so we have got to stop pussyfooting around what is happening in this country. We've got to say what is happening in this country. And I believe that when you look at the kind of corruption that we're talking about here, it doesn't matter if you're conservative or you're liberal. This is undemocratic. The country must be returned to its people.
We have municipal elections on Tuesday.
How's that going to go?
In Dover, maybe 25%. At best. Probably 20. 25 would be a good night. That's Dover. But
I think we had a quick movie.
My name's Garrett Graskamp. Again, thank you for coming today. Appreciate
Thank you.
So I've looked at your website, not as deeply as I wish I had time to do yet, but there are a lot of issues that you brought up and talked about today. What would be the top 2 or 3 that you would want to focus on at the beginning? Because there's going to, you have most of your energy and people behind you right in the first, 6 months. And, there's probably 10 things that you could focus on. What would be your top 3? And if you can, and I'm not sure I could, I know I couldn't do it. What laws do you think should be changed that would have the most impact for starting this process of changing the underlying rot, as you called it, in the country?
The cancer underlying all these other cancers is the undue influence of money, particularly corporate money, on our politics. Given the current makeup of the Supreme Court, it is not reasonable to assume that we will be able to overturn Citizens United decision anytime soon. And Citizens United is the decision that allows for this unlimited corporate financial influence. What we can do, and what I will do as president, is to submit legislation to establish public funding of federal campaigns. And I'll give you an example. I've raised for my presidential campaign $6 million. Now, I don't know about you, but in the world I live in, $6 million, $6 million. Presidential campaigns, that means she's squeaking by. There are people spending $10 million on TV ads alone in Iowa. And another one, a billionaire, because he spent $34 billion, can get on the debate stage. The money is running everything, and then the political parties are beholden to the money, and that's why the DNC wants me off the debate stage, because I'm saying things that's upsetting to their corporate donors, like big pharmaceutical companies. It's this bad. We've got to get the money out of politics. That's number one. And ultimately, there needs to be a constitutional convention, a constitutional amendment, that would establish public funding for federal campaigns. That's number one. Then I believe there needs to be, in order, like I said, it's a big ship, and we need to turn it around. And it's going to take some time. But we need enough people enrolled in knowing that's what this generation needs to do. We have gotten so off course, our moral compass, our democratic ideals, our humanitarian values. This has gone so far away from democracy and humanitarianism and just concern about our fellow human beings. It's going to take some time. First thing we need to do, I believe, we need a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American. Politicians talk about a health care crisis. You know what I say to that? Why don't you start by not driving so many people nuts? When you have millions and millions of people living every day with chronic economic anxiety, and this room is an example, everybody that described what you do, you're what keeps this country running. You're like I said, you're the sort of the unseen, like all the stuff that's unseen in here is who made those windows? Who put in those blinds? Who manufactured those blinds? Who made those tiles? Who did that light? Well, you don't see it, but it's what enables you to be in the room. And that's who the country should belong to. So we need a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity. People are living in chronic tension and anxiety. You see, this is the field I've been in for 35 years. That's why I see this. I've been up close and personal with the personal effects of bad public policy. When you said, if we could strike, we would shut the state government down. Now, what does that really say? That means people have had enough. People have had enough. You can only squeeze people so long. And what I've seen in the last 15 years, you know, I'm in a business where taking care of people in trouble is what you do. Somebody's got a cancer diagnosis, or somebody, their spouse is leaving, or their child is addicted and it's heroin. I understand that. That's the business I signed up for. I'm a counselor. But what I've seen in the last 15 years, and you guys are examples of this, too many people are in trouble in America who should not be in trouble. Too many people live with chronic anxiety economically who should not, because they do everything right. They work hard, they go to work, they should be able to have one job they show up for, they do well, and the rest of their life they can be with their families, they can contribute, they can be living a happy life. So we need massive infusion of economic hope. Number one, universal health care, a Medicare for all type plan. That's number one. Number two, I think we should make that college tuition at state colleges and universities free, because a lot of this economic anxiety is, how am I going to send my kids to college? And if my kids can't go to college, how will they ever be able to have the life that they want? And number three, take these loans off people's shoulders. The college loan debt is $1.5 trillion. You have over 1 million people who are dealing with that. So do those things as quickly as possible. And then you repeal that 2017 tax cut and all the other things I said. We have had a massive transfer of wealth. Where I come from, it's called theft. This has been going on for 40 years. A massive transfer of the public treasury into, this is your money. You pay taxes. A massive transfer of wealth into the hands of 1%, who now own more wealth than the bottom 90%. Jeff Bezos paying no federal taxes. And by the way, there are billionaires who agree with this. There are very powerful corporate leaders who are now saying publicly, we got to balance this ship. This is going to explode. This is going to be bad. You're going to have another 10, 20 years, you're going to have young people storming the Bastilles.
We have time for one more question. Did you have a question?
Oh, he actually managed to ask it already.
Okay. Anybody else in this end? I just want to make sure yes.
Yeah, so I read some of your brochure here. I'm curious that you brought up that you are interested in lowering the education debt. I haven't specifically.
Lowering the what?
The education
Yeah.
the loan debt.
Yes.
For colleges.
Yes.
How would you specifically do that?
Okay.
Because I've not heard. I keep hearing these very general. This is a great idea, which I would. People have chosen to go to colleges for higher education. I understand the benefit. I come from a family where we all have various degrees in debt. But at the same time, how does the government plan to do that?
We have been trained. I hear you. We have been trained to ask pretty please. We've been trained to say pretty please, because how are you going to pay to help us? So as I said, you repeal that 2017 $2 trillion tax cut. We have a $1.5 trillion college loan debt. We have a $2 trillion tax cut that goes 83 cents of the dollar to to the largest earners. Trade you. That's what we do. When you do those things that I mentioned, and then you start, one of the things that starts happening, when you look at what that tax cut did, it took the corporate tax rate. We have taken the corporate tax rate and just lowered it and lowered it and lowered it and lowered it. There was a time when corporate money paid 30% into the public treasury. Now it pays 11%. What you do is you start taxing people. On our way here, I was talking to Paul. I was reading on my phone, and it was in Wall Street Journal or something today about people who have homes that cost $100 million. And one is not enough. Now, I'm not anti-capitalist, and I'll tell you something, Oprah Winfrey had me on her show, and I sold a lot of books because of it. So I have a sense of the high side of the marketplace. I have been blessed by it. The problem in America is not that some people can make money. The problem is that not enough people get to make money in America today. Not enough people can get into the club. People are constricted. People can't grow, they can't spread their wings. So we need a massive repair. So when you say, what are we going to do? You do those things like I said, you repeal that tax cut, you stop these corporate subsidies, you negotiate for drug prices, you cut that military spending, which has more to do with defense contractors, you have that 3% tax on billionaires and 2% on 50 million or more. You know what we're going to have cash on hand, and that's where we're going to get the money.
Marianne, I don't. I'm sorry. I want to thank you very much for
Thank
being here
you.
today and answering our members' questions.
Thank you.
And lifting the Unions for All agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Before you leave, maybe we could grab a photo with everyone at the back of the room.